Yeah, well, this is one thing I was going to say, I'm looking at some of Carnecki's crosstabs now that I'll share in a minute. But um, the one thing that I thought about, we can never, ever, ever, and we should never, ever, ever forget the lessons of 2016. You are right. You are right. You are right. You are right. However, I do think though there's some similar dynamics, but there's also some huge differences between Hillary and Vice President Harris. I think the biggest difference is, and this is not Hillary's fault, I think the newness of Vice President Harris, I think there's a momentum, and this, people will, if Harris wins this, people will be trying to recreate what happened organically. And remember before I said that you could have scripted this better if she wins. Um, she's in a much better today. I originally thought her strongest position to win president is in 28 after 8 years as vice president if they're successful Biden administration. But if you look at the first 4 years where they were trying to come at her neck and she did a good job of batting it off, and even though she was getting bad press, not enough people were paying attention to her, right? And now that the people are paying attention to her, it's all good, and we're finding that the narrative that's been told about her, or a lot of people, not you and I, but a lot of people are finding out that the narrative that's been told about her is actually not right. I think that because, and this is not Hillary's fault, but because Hillary had been the first lady since 1992, she had been a target, and so her negatives were harder for her to bat away. Her negatives were kind of, I hate that phrase, baked in, and you could say that should have been something she could overcome, but she had a harder time undoing her negatives. A lot of people heard crap about Vice President Harris. The minute that they got to see her one on one without the thing, they liked her. They liked her. So I do think the biggest difference between, you're right, we could not forget what happened to Hillary in 2016. But I think the biggest difference between Hillary and Vice President Harris is that Hillary had a much longer time in the hot box, so to speak, and it was harder for her to shake the negative perceptions of her. They were wrong negative perceptions of her, but it was harder. I think that the newness of Harris makes it easier for her to shake stuff, and that may, at the end of the day, be the difference for Harris, especially as it relates to the Harris versus Hillary analogy. Does that make
Yeah, no,
sense?
I couldn't agree with you more. That's one of the three big reasons I think it's different than it is in 2016. Here's what I think are the three biggest differences. One, you said it right. Hillary had basically her entire career from first lady on of trying to fight negative storylines and headlines. People think that anybody died within a 300-mile radius of her was the Clintons' fault. Remember, there was like trees and conspiracy theories of anybody who dropped or anybody who had a stroke or a heart attack. It was because the Clintons poisoned them, right? And Bill's negatives, right? The Monica stuff, like all that stuff was baked into Hillary, which is, I think, unfair. But again, she had to fight it and she had to overcome it. Ultimately, she wasn't able to, right? The second big reason is Donald Trump has a record now. In 2015, he could just say, I'm a successful businessman, although he was wrong. But the perception of him in Hollywood, what he was a successful businessman, and he had all these real estate properties, and his name was everywhere. He was in every rap song. And now Kamala could fight and campaign against Donald Trump's record, and Hillary wasn't able to because Donald Trump didn't have a record. He wasn't a governor anywhere. He wasn't a senator. He wasn't anything. And he can't campaign against any of his votes or any of his policies because he didn't have any. And I think that's the second big reason that Kamala, or advantage that Kamala has. The third, and I know this is probably weird, John, and I'm feeling this idea of electing a woman president and making history, being on the forefront of history, breaking a glass ceiling, having a bunch of people wanting to vote for that is more present this time than in 16, and I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's because Hillary again was baked in from Bill, and maybe they didn't see her as breaking a glass ceiling. Part of it is because she's white, right? And Kamala is not, and there's a sort of another sort of glass ceiling that Kamala's breaking. I don't know if Barack had anything to do with it in the sense that we just made history with the first black president, and it wasn't as motivating to now go ahead and make history again by electing a back-to-back kind of historic presidential candidates. But I'm getting the sense of feeling is we need a women president. Women are activated post Roe more than they ever were. Again, I don't trust white women voters. I apologize to that group of people, but you have to show up. But after Donald Trump and after Roe and after all the extremism against IVF and birth control and women dying in parking lots, believe it or not, I think when George Floyd happened, John, I'm going to make a weird connection here, but when George Floyd happened, a lot of white people were saying, I just don't have that many black friends around me to understand that they face racism on a daily basis, right? Microaggressions in the workplace or getting pulled over by a cops at higher rates. A lot of white people usually statistically don't have that many black people around them in their inner circles, right? Um, I remember Hollywood directors saying, I want to hire a black DP or I want to hire a black costume designer, but I just don't know any because, again, you tend to hire your friends and your friends tend to be more interior, kind of, they mirror you more than anything. The difference, I think, with race and gender is most men know women who've probably either had a miscarriage or an abortion or take birth control or need IVF, or that young couple that gets married and 3, 4 years in, they're like, we're trying to have a baby, but we're struggling a little bit. And most, I assume that a majority of women, overwhelming amount of women, know other women who have either had abortions or took a plan B or whatever, right? And I think that's also, again, I'm not saying that racism is less important. What I'm saying is I think white people don't see it as much, whereas if your spouse is a woman, not being able to get birth control or needing an abortion or medical abortion, and you want to keep the baby and you lose a baby because of a miscarriage and you need to have an abortion, I think more people know those people, if that makes sense. And I think a post-Roe world, you have probably a lot more women who are going to vote than they did in 2016. And that's going to benefit, I think, Kamala more than anything. In 22, John, a big reason why the midterms were as successful as they were was because women voting. And I think that'll be the case, hopefully, this time. The women polling is out of this world. Registration for women is out of this world across the board, white women, black women, women of color, young women, older women. So I'm looking forward to seeing those numbers post election. But I think that's a big reason as well that Hillary didn't benefit from as much.